It appears that Pfizer and other large pharmaceutical companies are lobbying to stop legislation that would help whistleblowers hold companies liable for misbranding and other examples of corporate fraud. So now this is from reporter Li Feng, and he writes that major corporate interests, including Pfizer, are fighting an update to the False Claims Act, which is a law that rewards whistleblowers for filing anti-fraud lawsuits against contractors on behalf of the government. So understand that we have a lot of companies that do a lot of contract work on behalf of the government or for the government. So now that law, before it was neutered, by the way, had historically returned about $67 billion to the government, with whistleblowers helping to uncover wrongdoing by military contractors, as well as banks and pharmaceutical companies. Now, one example is Pfizer, who in 2009 paid $2.3 billion in criminal and civil fines to settle allegations that the company had illegally marketed several drugs for off-label usage. So now, the off-label usage is essentially using it for something else that it is not approved for. For a great example is ivermectin, right? So ivermectin is an antiparasitic. Okay, now if you use it to try to treat COVID-19, you're using it off-label. So now what Pfizer had done in this case is said, don't worry, you can use this drug, a different drug, not ivermectin, but you can use a drug to treat something that has not been approved for by the FDA. So now, in that settlement, whistleblowers had charged the company, instructed its marketing team to promote a drug called Bextra, which was approved only for arthritis and menstrual cramps. Instead, they said that they had promoted this to use for acute and surgical pain, which it was not approved for by the FDA, which placed patients at risk for heart attack and stroke. Now, the company also had paid doctors for kickbacks for prescribing the drug for off-label uses. So now, lawsuit brought under the False Claims Act through the actions of 6 whistleblowers ended in one of the largest healthcare fraud settlements in history. So that was then. This is now, where federal courts had managed to water this down significantly. Now, these decisions had expanded the scope of what is known as materiality, and which, in law, is the measure of the estimated effect the presence or absence of an item of information may have on the accuracy or validity of a statement. So what that did, again, is the court made it more difficult to allow these whistleblowers to make their case that these companies had acted improperly. Now, in 2016, the Supreme Court ruled in Universal Health Services versus United States, Escobar, that a fraud lawsuit could be dismissed if the government had continued to pay the contractor. So the government paying these companies, pharmaceutical companies, for example, or it could be, again, a defense contractor, for lying about their product, that you can't do that. But if you were getting paid by the government, you are allowed to do the fraud and not get in trouble for it. That's very strange. So the court reasoned that if the government continued to pay the company despite fraudulent activity, then the fraud is not material to the government contract. So, well, I mean, you did fraud, but if you're paying, since we're still paying you for something else, then that doesn't affect our contract at all. Great. Fantastic. That ruling functionally neutered application of the False Claims Act against many companies that are so large, the government cannot abruptly sever payments, especially against large healthcare interests and defense contractors. So basically, even if they're found guilty of fraudulent activity, advertising or whatever, as long as you still have your government contract and you're still getting paid by the government to do business, you can get away and still make money. Because, again, you're getting paid by the government. That's really strange. Really kind of fucked, actually. And by the way, it's having, this changes are having a big impact. For example, recent court decisions, including cases involving Honeywell and Halliburton, show contractors winning dismissal of fraud simply by citing continued government payments. Last year, a federal district court dismissed a False Claims Act against engineering company AECOM, brought by a whistleblower alleging widespread billing fraud for a $2 billion contract in Afghanistan. AECOM's lawyers also said the government's continued payments to the company. That lawsuit is currently under appeal. And it's also discouraging new cases. For example, under the Trump administration in 2018, their Justice Department had issued the Granston memo, which encouraged the dismissal of more whistleblower-initiated suits under the False Claims Act. And now that Trump is out of office, well, something interesting actually happened. Biden's actually done something a little bit to this regard. Interesting. So in October, Attorney General Merrick Garland actually officially rescinded the overly restrictive memo. And afterwards, Senator Chuck Grassley, also giving him credit here, a Republican of Iowa, among others, by the way, this is bipartisan, including Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy, are actually pushing to update this law to give whistleblowers greater protection against potential industry retaliation and make it more difficult for companies charged with fraud to dismiss cases on these procedural grounds. Again, the procedural ground being, I'm getting paid by the government, so you can't stop my contract. Now, the legislation, the False Claims Amendments Act of 2021, adjusts the materiality standard to include instances in which the government made payments despite knowledge of fraud if other reasons exist for continuing the contract. The bill also expands the anti-retaliation protections of the law, which currently only cover current whistleblower employees of a company. The bill seeks to prevent an industry from blacklisting former whistleblowers seeking employment. So all of that stuff is good. Now, there's a problem though. Lobbyists. Corporate lobbyists have flooded into Congress, as they always do on any of these issues. Now, Pfizer hired Hazen Marshall, a former policy director for Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, to lobby on this issue, along with the law firm Williams & Jensen, which is a powerhouse that employs an array of former congressional staffers. So these are people who used to work for Congress or work in Congress for congressmen who have these personal ties. They are now lobbyists that will go to these congresspeople and say, you better not support this. These companies must continue to get their government contracts. It doesn't matter how much fraud that they've done. It doesn't matter how many people they have hurt with their fraud. We must continue. The money must flow. The spice must flow. And that's really it. That's really it. Now, their allies in Congress, industry's allies in Congress, have been blocking the crap out of this. In fact, in an initial test vote, the bill was blocked. And in August, Grassley proposed an amendment act as an amendment to the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So look, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, it's filled with corporate welfare. This would have actually helped. But in a twist, you know who blocked it? Senate Democrats, working with Republicans like Senator Tom Cotton. Tom Cotton actually tried to erase the entire bill. The amendment Cotton proposed actually sought to strike all substantive lines of the bill except for the title, which is simply the description of the legislation. During the committee debate, Cotton argued that the Supreme Court had made the right decision in Escobar and the continued payment standard for materiality. The money must continue to flow. And of course, most of the companies they're afraid of bad PR. And so they're hiding their efforts to lobby against this bill. In fact, you have the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Now, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is lobbying heavily. But the U.S. Chamber of Commerce they have a ton of member corporations. And so the Chamber of Commerce has actually made the Grassley bill one of its primary targets for defeat. In fact, we know the Chamber of Commerce has members likely hit by the False Claims Act before. And so they joined in with other trade groups, including the American Hospital Association, the Healthcare Leadership Council, PhRMA, which is the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, and the American Bankers Association. All of them together are trying to destroy this bill. The known corporate interests lobbying on the Grassley bill, or I should say against it, are Pfizer, Amgen, AstraZeneca, Merck, and Genentech. These companies listed the legislation on lobbying disclosures. All five had paid nine-figure settlements over healthcare fraud brought to light through the False Claims Act. According to whistleblowers, this fraud is rampant, as are kickbacks. In fact, you had John Kopczynski, one of the Pfizer whistleblowers in that original case, saying this: the whole of culture of Pfizer is driven by sales. And if you didn't sell drugs illegally, you were not seen as a team player. He added that drug companies are notorious for paying kickbacks, giving benefits in exchange for a competitive advantage. And so, look, understand that this happens as a result of our for-profit system. There is no reason that the pharmaceutical industry should exist. We need to nationalize the drug industry. Just get rid of it. Yes, I said nationalize. You're goddamn right. Why? It's because it's too important of an industry to allow to be for profit. I mean, if they're going to exist outside of government control, at least make them nonprofits. There has to be something. Because you can't allow these companies. By the way, and understand that this isn't to go against a lot of the drugs that they come up with, right? No, a lot of the stuff they come up with, actually, they don't even come up with it. It's researchers at universities. Then these companies go in and they buy the rights and they do the marketing and they raise the prices when they sell the drugs. And they raise the prices to a very significant markup so that they can profit from these drugs that were, in most cases, funded by the federal government, funded by research from the federal government. And so, yes, nationalizing these companies wouldn't hurt innovation at all. And I know that's one of the big things. Oh, but you understand, you have to have the private industry to do the innovation. No, the innovation happens as a result of trying to solve problems. And so, yes, nationalize it, because you know what? Fraud gets people killed. It is insane that you cannot hold them accountable when you have proof of fraud, just because the government's paying them. You can't end the contract currently when they're getting paid by the government, by us, by the taxpayer. And then you're also allowing them to eviscerate whistleblowers who actually call out the fraud. This is disastrous. This is a clear result of the money in politics. And again, let's be honest, these are federal judges, right? Not Supreme Court judges, but federal judges. And these pro-corporate judges were seated by Republicans, and in some cases with the help of Democrats, or in many cases, I should say, as Obama and the rest of the Democrats ignored the judiciary as all of these seats were open. All of these judicial seats were open, and once Trump got into office, he got all of the appointments that he could ever wish for. And that's what leads to this. That's what leads to this. And so, look, at least there's right now some bipartisan push to try to update this law to actually fix this problem so that we can actually at least try to hold companies accountable and to protect whistleblowers. I am just very concerned with how corrupt our system is, that this money will, flood in and end up killing this entire thing. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.